Werewolf romance story, written by Judith. Prologue. The agony began as a sharp blade twisting beneath Arya's ribs, but within moments it had coiled around her swollen belly like iron chains heated in forge fire. She clawed at the rough stone wall of the corridor, her fingernails splitting against the ancient rock. "Thorn," she choked out, her voice barely rising above the howling wind that screamed through the arrow slits. The great hall of Blackwood Keep echoed with laughter and music, but the corridor leading to the dungeon cells was silent as a tomb. Her husband, her alpha, her mate stood at the threshold where torchlight met shadow, fastening the silver clasp of his ceremonial cloak. He looked magnificent in his regalia, cold as winter steel, distant as the stars, everything an alpha should be. "Thorn, please." Arya stumbled forward, her bare feet slipping on the icy stone. "Something is wrong with the child. I need the pack healer, please." Thorn turned. His eyes, the color of storm clouds before lightning strikes, swept over her with the same expression one might give a lame horse. There was no warmth in them, no recognition, only the faintest flicker of disgust. He glanced toward the great hall, where the celebration was already beginning. "Arya, the pack is waiting," he said, his voice smooth as oil on water. "Celene's coronation as Luna begins within the hour. The elders are assembled. I cannot be absent." "I cannot walk," she whispered, her knees buckling as another wave of pain crashed through her. "The baby something is tearing inside me. I'm begging you." He exhaled through his nose, the sound a man makes when his favorite hound disappoints him. "You are weak, Arya. You have always been weak." He turned toward one of the dungeon guards. "Send word to the healer when she has time, after the ceremony." "You're leaving me?" Her voice shattered like glass. "You're leaving me in the dark while you crown another woman? I have a duty to this pack, Arya, a duty you could never fulfill." He stepped toward the light, toward the music, toward Selene Moon, who waited in her gown of midnight blue. "You knew what you were when you took my name, a human-born mistake, a Luna who cannot even call forth her wolf." The iron door to the dungeon stairwell groaned open behind her. Cold air rushed up from the depths below, carrying the smell of damp stone and old blood. "Do me one kindness," Thorn said without looking back. "Die quietly, Arya. It is the only service left that you can render this pack." The door slammed shut, the bolt scraped home. The sound of his boots on stone faded toward the celebration, toward the light, toward the woman who would erase every trace of Arya's existence. Arya stood alone in the corridor of a fortress that had never been a home, her white silk dress now gray with dust and stained with the evidence of her body's betrayal. She pressed her back against the freezing wall and slid down, down, down until she sat crumpled on the floor like discarded parchment. He didn't look back. He never looked back. Before we go further, I want to thank you for choosing Judy's Romance Library. If you're enjoying this tale of hidden royalty and brutal betrayal, drop a comment telling us where you're listening from and what drew you to this story. Your support is what keeps these voices alive, and it helps us know we're reaching the hearts that need these words most. Chapter 1. The Healer's Chamber. The healer's quarters smelled of dried wolfsbane and burning sage. Arya lay on a narrow cot, her body trembling beneath a thin woolen blanket. The pain had dulled to a deep, grinding ache, but the terror had only grown sharper. "Luna Arya," the old healer said, though her voice carried no respect, only weariness. She looked ancient, her face creased like old leather. "Just Arya," she corrected, her voice hoarse. She had never felt worthy of the title, not when she was merely a piece on Thorn's board, a pawn to be sacrificed. The healer's gnarled hands pressed against Arya's abdomen, and her eyes went distant, seeing something beyond the physical realm. The silence stretched thin as spider silk, fragile and terrifying. "Is it—" Arya's throat closed. "Is the child dying?" The healer's eyes snapped open. "Dying? She almost laughed, but the sound died in her throat. Child, this is no ordinary pregnancy. She pulled her hands away as if they'd been burned. There is a heartbeat, but it is not just a heartbeat. Arya stared at the shadows dancing on the ceiling. I don't understand. The healer leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. The child you carry bears a wolf spirit. Not just any wolf spirit, a sovereign spirit. The kind that legends are written about. The kind that makes alphas kneel. But that's impossible, Arya stammered. Thorn is high-blooded, yes, but I'm nothing. I can't even shift. I'm human-born, a failure of the bloodline. The old woman's eyes narrowed. Are you certain of that, girl? She touched Arya's forehead, and suddenly Arya's vision exploded with silver light. She saw herself as a child, saw her mother's face, a face she'd forgotten, beautiful and terrible and crowned with moonlight. Saw symbols being carved into her infant skin, glowing chains wrapped around a massive wolf that howled with the voice of thunder. You were sealed, the healer breathed. Someone bound your wolf so deep that even you forgot it was there. But this child, she placed her hand over Arya's belly again. This child is breaking every seal. Royal blood calls to royal blood, girl, and something in you is screaming to answer. Arya's breath came in short gasps. What are you saying? The healer stepped back, and for the first time, Arya saw fear in her ancient eyes. I'm saying that the weak Luna they threw into the dark is not weak at all. And when your son is born, Alpha Thorn Blackwood will learn exactly what he abandoned in that corridor. She paused at the door. If you survive what's coming, girl, you will burn brighter than any star in his sky, and he will spend the rest of his days reaching for a light he can never touch again. The door closed. Arya lay in the darkness, her hand pressed to her belly, and felt something ancient stir beneath her skin. Something that had been sleeping for far too long. Something that was finally waking up. If this story is gripping your heart, don't just listen in silence. Subscribe to Judy's Romance Library right now. Hit that follow button, share this episode with someone who needs to hear about reclaiming their power, and leave a rating that tells the world this story matters. We pour our souls into bringing you these tales of transformation and triumph, but we can only continue if you take action. So don't wait, please subscribe, share, and let us know this resonated with you. Your voice amplifies ours, and together we create something unstoppable. Chapter 2. The Silver Moon Awakening. 3 nights after Thorn abandoned her, Arya woke to the sound of screaming. The healer's quarters shook with the force of something massive slamming against the outer walls. Arya pushed herself upright, her body still weak, still aching from the ordeal that refused to end. Through the narrow window, she saw torches scattering like fireflies in a storm. The shouts of guards echoed through the stone corridors, followed by sounds that made her blood freeze, the wet tearing of flesh, the crunch of bone, howls that belonged to no wolf she'd ever heard. Rogues. The door to her chamber splintered inward. A massive figure filled the doorway, more beast than man, its eyes glowing yellow in the darkness. Blood dripped from its claws. It smiled, revealing teeth like daggers. Found you, it rasped. The Alpha's discarded mate. They said you'd be easy prey. Arya pressed herself against the wall, her hands instinctively covering her belly. Stay back. The rogue laughed, a sound like rocks grinding together. Or what? You'll shift? Everyone knows you're broken, little Luna. A wolf without a wolf, just meat and fear. It lunged. Something inside Arya shattered. Not her body, something deeper. Something that had been locked behind chains of silver and ancient words, behind seals carved into her infant flesh by hands she couldn't remember. The breaking felt like the world splitting open, like the sky falling, like every star in the heavens screaming her name at once. The rogue stopped mid-leap, suspended in the air as if caught by invisible hands. Its eyes went wide with terror. Arya looked down at her own hands and saw them glowing. Not the warm gold of an alpha's power, but cold silver fire that burned without heat. Her skin began to ripple, but not like a normal shift. This was something primal, something that made the very stones of Blackwood Keep tremble in recognition. "Impossible," the rogue whispered. You're... Her wolf erupted. But it wasn't a wolf. It was something older, something that had existed before packs and alphas and all the petty hierarchies of the mortal realm. Silver fur that seemed woven from moonlight itself. Eyes that held the depth of centuries. A presence so overwhelming that every wolf within 100 leagues felt it slam into their consciousness like a hammer blow. The rogue tried to run. It died before it reached the door. Arya stood in the wreckage of the healer's chamber, her massive Lycan form barely contained within the stone walls, and felt memories flooding back. Her mother's face, clearer now. A palace of ice and silver and mountains she'd never seen. A crown, a throne, a name she'd been forced to forget. The wall behind her exploded inward. But the figure that stepped through the rubble wasn't another rogue. This was something else entirely, a man in armor that seemed forged from starlight, his presence even more overwhelming than her own. His hair was silver white, his eyes the same ancient violet that Arya saw when she looked at her reflection in still water. He took one look at her Lycan form and fell to his knees. "Daughter," he said, and his voice broke on the word. "Daughter, I have searched for you for 20 years. Arya's wolf receded, leaving her human and naked and trembling on the blood-soaked floor. The man, her father, she knew without knowing how she knew, removed his cloak and wrapped it around her shoulders. His hands shook as he touched her face. "Ariana Silvermoon," he whispered, "they took you from your cradle, sealed your wolf, hid you among humans to keep you from your birthright. I have torn this realm apart looking for you." "I don't understand," Arya said, though even as she spoke, more memories surfaced. A lullaby sung in a language she shouldn't know, the taste of snow on her tongue, the weight of a crown she'd never worn. "You are not Arya Wolfheart," discarded Luna of a petty pack. Her father's eyes blazed with barely contained fury. "You are Ariana Silvermoon, crown princess of the Lycan Empire. And the child you carry," he placed his hand gently on her belly, "the child you carry is the heir to 2 thrones, the blood of alphas and the blood of kings." Outside, the sounds of battle had ceased. Through the broken wall, Arya could see figures in silver armor moving through Blackwood Keep, cutting down rogues with brutal efficiency. This wasn't a random attack. This was a rescue. "Thorn," Arya breathed. "He doesn't know. Thorn Blackwood is a fool who threw away a treasure because he couldn't recognize its worth." Her father's voice was ice and steel. "Let him keep his crown of mud and his mistress of ambition. You have a real kingdom waiting. A kingdom that has mourned your absence every day for 2 decades. He lifted her gently, cradling her as if she were made of glass. "Come home, daughter. Come home and claim what was always yours." As they passed through the corridors of Blackwood Keep, Arya saw guards frozen against the walls, unable to move under the weight of her father's power. She saw the great hall where Selene Moon sat on the Luna's throne, her face white with shock. She saw Thorn standing at the head of the feast table, his mouth open, his eyes fixed on Arya with an expression she'd never seen before. Recognition, and the first stirrings of terrible understanding. "Arya," he called out, his voice cracking. "Wait." But Arya didn't look back. For the first time in her life, she didn't look back. The northern wind carried them away into the night, toward mountains wreathed in silver mist, toward a home she'd forgotten but her soul had always remembered. Behind them, Blackwood Keep burned with questions that would take Thorn years to answer. Chapter 3. The Secret Kingdom. The northern tundra was not the wasteland Arya had imagined from children's tales. The Silvermoon Empire rose from the snow-covered mountains like a dream carved from ice and starlight, its towers spiraling toward the heavens, its walls humming with ancient power that made the air itself shimmer. Arya stood on the balcony of her chambers, wrapped in furs lined with silver thread, watching the sun set over peaks that scraped the belly of the sky. 6 months had passed since her father had carried her away from Blackwood Keep. 6 months of remembering, of training, of learning to be the princess she'd been born to be, and 6 months of feeling her son grow stronger within her belly. "Your Highness," her handmaiden Lyra said softly from the doorway, "the midwives say it is time." The birth was unlike anything Arya had endured before. Not the desperate, terrified labor of the Blackwood dungeon, but something transcendent. As her son entered the world, the sky above the palace split open with light. Thunder rolled across mountains that had been silent for a century. Every wolf in the empire felt the moment his first breath filled his lungs, felt the weight of a power so absolute that even the ancient Lycan nobles found themselves bowing without conscious thought. Arya held him against her chest, this tiny creature with eyes that already glowed with violet fire, and felt the last chains around her heart shatter. "Caden," she whispered. "Caden Silvermoon." Her father stood at the foot of the bed, tears streaming down his weathered face. "The prophecy was true," he breathed. "The Alpha of Alphas, the King of Kings, the child who would unite the mortal and immortal realms." Caden's first cry shook the palace foundations. The years that followed were both peaceful and powerful. Arya learned to rule the way her mother had before her, with wisdom tempered by mercy, strength softened by compassion. She learned the old ways, the ancient rites, the language of her people that sang in her blood like music she'd always known. But it was Caden who truly astonished them all. By his second winter, he could command the snow to fall or cease with a gesture. By his third, he could call wolves from 100 leagues away, and they would come running, unable to resist the pull of his will. By his fourth, he stood before the assembled nobles of the Silvermoon Empire and demonstrated a power that made even his grandfather step back in awe. "Kneel," Caden said, his child's voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. Every wolf in the throne room dropped to their knees, not by choice, not by respect, but because their wolves simply could not resist him. He was their sovereign, their alpha, their king, and their very nature demanded submission. Arya watched her son with pride and a touch of fear. This was the child Thorn had called a bastard, had dismissed as beneath his notice. This was the heir the alpha of Blackwood Pack had abandoned in the dark. "Mama," Caden said one evening as they stood together on the battlements, watching the northern lights dance across the sky. "When will I meet my father?" Arya's hand tightened on the stone. "Why do you ask, little one?" "Because I see him in my dreams." Caden's violet eyes were older than they should be. "I see him crying. I see him searching. I see him realizing what he lost." "And what do you feel when you see him?" Caden was quiet for a long moment. Then, "I feel sorry for him. He had everything and threw it away because he couldn't see what was right in front of him." Arya knelt beside her son, taking his small hands in hers. "You are wise beyond your years, my heart." "Will you forgive him?" Caden asked. "When he comes begging?" Because they both knew he would come. Word of the Silvermoon Princess had spread throughout the realm. Whispers of the child who could command the very elements. Stories of the dead Luna who had risen as a queen. "Forgiveness is not the same as returning," Arya said carefully. "I can forgive the man who hurt me, but I will never again be the woman who waited in the dark for someone to choose her. That woman died in the dungeon of Blackwood Keep. What emerged was something he can never possess." Caden nodded, understanding in ways a child shouldn't. "Then we will show him what he lost, not to be cruel, but so he learns the lesson." And what lesson is that? Her son smiled, and for a moment he looked exactly like her, strong, certain, unbreakable. That love given freely is the most precious thing in all the realms, and once you throw it away, all the power in the world cannot bring it back. Chapter 4. The Alpha's Regret. The Blackwood pack was dying. Thorn stood in the great hall that had once echoed with strength and prosperity, and saw only the hollow shell of what remained. The tapestries hung in tatters. The stone floor was cracked and stained. Half the seats at the council table sat empty families who had fled to other territories, seeking alphas who could actually protect them. Selene Moon reclined on the Luna's throne, draped in silks that cost more than a farmer's yearly harvest, picking at a plate of honeyed figs while the pack's coffers ran dry. She'd grown fat on luxury while the pack grew lean with hunger. "We need to increase taxes again," she said without looking up. "My dressmaker says the new fashion from the Eastern Territories requires imported lace, and the cost is simply astronomical." Thorn's jaw clenched. "We increased taxes 3 months ago. The farmers are already struggling to feed their own families." "Then let them work harder." Selene popped another fig into her mouth. "Honestly, Thorn, you're the alpha. Make them obey." Once, her callousness might have seemed like strength to him. Now it just felt like rot spreading through his pack's foundation. When had he become so blind? When had he mistaken cruelty for power, selfishness for confidence? He knew the exact moment. The moment he'd left Arya bleeding on the dungeon floor. The visions had started 2 years ago. At first, just flashes Arya's face in the darkness, her hand reaching for him, her voice calling his name. He dismissed them as guilt, nothing more. But they'd grown stronger, more vivid, until he could barely sleep without seeing her. Except she wasn't the Arya he remembered. In his visions, she wore a crown of silver starlight. She stood in a palace carved from ice and moonbeams. She commanded wolves with a gesture, her eyes blazing with that impossible violet light he'd seen the night she'd transformed. "You're doing it again," Selene snapped, throwing her plate aside. The porcelain shattered on the stone floor. "You're thinking about her, that pathetic human you were married to." "She wasn't human," Thorn said quietly. "Oh, please, not this again." Selene rose from the throne, her face twisting with contempt. "She was weak. She couldn't shift. She embarrassed you in front of the entire pack. I did you a favor by—" She stopped. Her eyes went wide. "By what?" Thorn's voice dropped to a growl. "Finish what you were going to say, Selene." But she'd already revealed too much. Thorn crossed the space between them in 3 strides, his hand closing around her throat, not enough to hurt, but enough to hold her in place. "The mating curse," he said, pieces falling into place with horrible clarity. "The one the shamans whispered about. The one that clouds an alpha's judgment, makes him see his true mate as worthless. You did this. You cursed me." Selene clawed at his hand, gasping. "It was already there. Your pride, your ambition, your need to be the strongest. I just gave it a little push. She was beneath you, Thorn. A Luna who couldn't even shift." He released her, and she crumpled to the floor, coughing. Thorn stared at his hands as if seeing them for the first time. How many times had these hands pushed Arya away? How many times had he watched her try to earn his love and felt only disgust? The curse might have amplified his worst qualities, but they'd been there all along. Selene hadn't created his pride. She'd just fed it until it consumed everything good in him. "Get out," he said. "What?" "Get out of my territory. You are no longer Luna. You are no longer welcome in Blackwood lands." His alpha power rolled out like thunder, making every wolf in the keep drop to their knees. "If I see you again, I will kill you." Selene scrambled toward the door, her fine silks dragging through the dust and broken porcelain. At the threshold, she turned back, her face ugly with rage. "You think she'll take you back?" You think the Silver Moon Princess gives a damn about the alpha who left her to die? She's moved on, Thorn. She's building an empire while you rot in the ruins of yours. You'll spend the rest of your miserable life reaching for something you can never touch again. The door slammed. The silence that followed was absolute. Thorn sank into his chair, buried his face in his hands, and finally let himself feel the full weight of what he'd done. He'd had everything a mate whose loyalty was absolute, whose heart was pure, whose bloodline could have elevated his pack to heights he'd never imagined. And he'd thrown it away for a woman who'd cursed him, bled his pack dry, and cared only for her own advancement. That night, the vision came again. But this time, Arya wasn't alone. She held a child, a boy with dark hair and eyes that glowed with violet fire. A child who radiated power so absolute that even in Thorn's dream, his wolf whimpered and pressed low to the ground. His son. The heir he'd called a bastard, the child he'd sentenced to death alongside his mother. Arya looked directly at him in the vision, as if she could see through the veil between dreaming and waking. She didn't speak, but her message was clear. You had your chance. Thorn woke with tears streaming down his face and a howl building in his chest. He stumbled to the balcony and screamed his grief into the night sky, a sound so broken that wolves throughout his territory whimpered in response. He had been the alpha of Blackwood Pack. He had commanded respect and fear in equal measure. He had believed himself worthy of greatness. But he had failed the only test that mattered. Chapter 5. The Return of the Queen. The Summit of Sovereigns occurred once every decade in neutral territory, a massive stone amphitheater built by the ancients, where alphas and rulers from across the realm gathered to settle disputes, forge alliances, and display their power. Thorn sat in the section reserved for alphas, watching the assembled wolves with hollow eyes. His pack was so diminished that several of the other alphas had openly laughed at his arrival. Blackwood, once feared, was now pitied. The announcer's voice rang out across the amphitheater. The final delegation has arrived. All rise for Her Imperial Majesty, Ariana Silvermoon, Queen Regent of the Lycan Empire, Princess of the Eternal North, bearer of the ancient crown. The massive doors at the far end of the amphitheater swung open. Arya walked through them, and the world held its breath. She wore armor forged from silver starlight, etched with runes that predated written language. A crown of ice and moonstone rested on her dark hair. Her eyes blazed with that impossible violet light. But it wasn't her appearance that made every wolf in the amphitheater drop to their knees. It was the sheer, overwhelming presence of her power, rolling out like a tidal wave of absolute authority. Behind her walked a boy of perhaps 5 summers, small, but carrying himself with the confidence of someone who'd never known doubt. His eyes swept across the assembled wolves, assessing, judging, finding them all wanting. Thorn's breath stopped in his lungs. His son, his heir, the child he'd abandoned. Arya's eyes found him across the vast space, and for a moment time seemed to freeze. Thorn saw everything in her gaze, the pain he'd caused, the strength she'd forged from that pain, the absolute certainty that she owed him nothing. She looked away, dismissing him as casually as one might dismiss a servant. The High Elder of the Summit stepped forward, bowing deeply. Your Imperial Majesty, we are honored by your presence. The Summit recognizes the sovereign authority of the Silver Moon Empire. I thank the assembled wolves for their welcome, Arya said, her voice carrying effortlessly across the amphitheater. I come not to make demands, but to present my heir. Crown Prince Caden Silvermoon, Alpha of Alphas, future king of the Lycan Empire. The boy stepped forward. So small, so young, so completely, overwhelmingly powerful that the very stones of the amphitheater began to hum with recognition. Kneel, Caden said. It wasn't a request. It wasn't even a command. It was simply reality asserting itself. Every wolf in the amphitheater dropped to their knees. Alphas who'd ruled for decades, warriors who'd never bowed to anyone, ancient wolves who remembered when the world was young, all of them fell before a 5-year-old child because their wolves gave them no choice. Thorn's knees hit the stone floor so hard he felt something crack. His wolf, the proud alpha spirit that had carried him through countless battles, whimpered and pressed itself flat in submission. This child was his superior, his sovereign, his better in every way that mattered. Chapter 6. The Final Rejection. The summit proceedings continued for 3 more days, but Thorn barely heard a word of them. He sat in his designated seat, watching Arya command the room with effortless grace, watching his son, their son, demonstrate powers that made the assembled alphas whisper in awe and fear. Every moment was a knife twisting deeper into his chest. On the final evening, as the delegates prepared for the closing feast, Thorn finally gathered what remained of his courage. He found Arya alone on one of the high balconies overlooking the valley, the setting sun painting the sky in shades of blood and gold. "Arya," he said, and his voice cracked on her name. She didn't turn. "That is not my name. Not anymore." "Ariana, then, Your Majesty. Whatever you want me to call you." He took a step closer, saw her stiffen. "Please, just give me a moment." "You had years of moments, Thorn. Thousands of them. You spent every single one reminding me how worthless I was." Her voice was calm, detached, like she was discussing the weather. Somehow that hurt worse than rage would have. "I was cursed. Selene used dark magic to cloud my judgment." "Stop!" Now she did turn, and the look in her eyes made him take a step back. "Do you think I don't know about the curse? Do you think my shamans didn't examine every thread of magic woven around you?" "Yes, Selene amplified your worst qualities. But they were your qualities, Thorn. She didn't create your pride. She didn't invent your cruelty. She just fed what was already rotting inside you." "I know." The words tore out of him. "I know. And I have spent every day since that night drowning in regret. My pack is in ruins. My name is a joke among alphas. But none of that matters compared to what I lost when I lost you. You never had me to lose." Arya's laugh was bitter as winter wind. "You had a woman who would have died for you, who did almost die for you. But you never saw her as anything more than an embarrassment. I see her now. I see you. I see what I threw away." Thorn dropped to his knees, something he'd never done for anyone except his father. "I'm begging you. Give me a chance to make this right. Let me be the mate I should have been. Let me be a father to our son. Let me spend the rest of my life proving I'm worthy of you." For a moment, just a heartbeat, he thought he saw something soften in her eyes. Then it was gone, replaced by steel. "Do you know what your son asked me?" "Thorn?" he asked. "If I would forgive you when you came begging." She moved to stand directly in front of him, forcing him to look up at her. "And I told him that forgiveness is not the same as returning. So yes, I forgive you. I forgive the broken man who was too blind to see what was right in front of him. I forgive the alpha who valued power over love. I even forgive the husband who left his pregnant wife to die in the dark." Hope flared in Thorn's chest. "But I will never come back to you." Arya's voice was gentle now, gentle in the way an executioner might be gentle when delivering a merciful death. "Because you didn't love the woman in the white dress when she had nothing. You don't deserve the queen who has everything." "I've changed," Thorn said desperately. "I'm not the same man who—" "You changed because you lost me, because your pride was wounded, because you realized the treasure you'd thrown away." She cupped his face in her hands, and for a moment it felt like forgiveness, like hope. "But I didn't change, Thorn. I was always this woman, this powerful, this royal, this worthy. The crown didn't make me a queen. The armor didn't make me strong. I was always enough. You just refused to see it." She released him and stepped back. My value was never dependent on your ability to recognize it. My worth was never granted by your approval. I was a princess even when you called me worthless. I was powerful even when you called me weak. I was enough even when you said I was nothing. Mama? Caden's voice came from the doorway. The boy looked at his father with those ancient violet eyes, and Thorn saw judgment there, not cruel, but absolute. It's time to go home. Yes, my heart, it is. Arya moved to her son, placing a protective hand on his shoulder. Can I say goodbye to him? Caden asked, gesturing to Thorn. Arya nodded. The boy approached, and Thorn felt his wolf press flat in submission again. Caden studied him for a long moment, then spoke with a wisdom that belonged to someone far older. You are my father by blood, Caden said carefully, but you are not my papa. You didn't choose us when it mattered. You didn't protect us when we needed you. You didn't love us when we had nothing to offer except ourselves. He paused. My grandfather says that being an alpha means being the first to sacrifice, the last to eat, the one who bears the weight so others don't have to. You failed that test. And now you live with the consequences. I'm sorry, Thorn whispered, tears streaming down his face. I'm so sorry. I know you are. Caden's expression softened slightly. And maybe one day, that will be enough for you to become the alpha you should have been, but it won't be enough to bring us back. Because we were never yours to lose. We belonged to ourselves all along. The boy turned and walked back to his mother. Arya took his hand, and together they moved toward the door. Ariana, Thorn called out one last time. If I could go back, if I could change just one moment. She looked back at him, and for the first time since entering the summit, she smiled. It was sad and beautiful and final. If you could go back, you would make the same choice, because that's who you were. The curse didn't change your nature, Thorn. It just revealed it. She paused in the doorway, silhouetted by the dying light. But here's the gift I'll give you. Learn from this. Become the alpha who would never abandon someone he's supposed to protect. Become the man who sees worth in others even when they can't see it themselves. Not for me, not to win me back, but because it's right. And if I do, his voice was barely a whisper, if I change everything, then you'll build a legacy worth having. You'll die knowing you became someone worthy of respect. And when your story is told, people will say, there was an alpha who learned the hardest lesson of all, that true power is knowing when to cherish what you have, not just how to take what you want. But you'll still be gone. Yes, Arya's voice was soft but unyielding, because some bridges, once burned, can never be rebuilt. The woman who waited for you in the dark is dead, Thorn. And the queen who rose from her ashes doesn't need anyone to choose her. She's already chosen herself. The door closed behind them with terrible finality. Thorn remained on his knees on the balcony as the sun sank below the horizon, painting the world in shades of purple and shadow. He stayed there as the stars came out, as the moon rose full and bright, as the sounds of the closing feast echoed through the amphitheater below. He stayed there until he finally understood the lesson she'd been teaching him all along. Your value is inherent, not granted. Your worth exists whether others see it or not, and the only person who needs to recognize your power is you. Arya had always been a queen. She'd always been enough. The tragedy wasn't that she'd discovered her worth, it was that he'd been too blind to see it when it mattered most. And now, like the sun that had set beyond the mountains, that chance was gone forever. Thank you for journeying with Arya, Caden, and even Thorn through this tale of hidden royalty and hard-won dignity. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of your own inherent worth, then I need you to do something right now. Subscribe to Judy's Romance Library. Share this story with someone who needs to hear that they're enough exactly as they are. Leave a comment telling us what this meant to you, because your words fuel our passion and help these stories reach the hearts that need them most. Don't just listen and disappear. Take action. Subscribe. Share. Review. Your voice matters, and together we're building something powerful. Don't let this be the last story you hear from us. Hit that subscribe button now, and let's continue this journey together.